There we go. So welcome everyone. My name is Gabrielle Kaplan-Mayer, and Shelly and I just wanted to begin by sharing about why we're doing this webinar series. This is a strange and unusual time for many of us because we've both been active in the faith community disability inclusion movement. We wanted to create opportunities for people with disabilities and those who love them, researchers and professionals in the field, to bring their stories to a new audience. We think that our guests have interesting perspectives on a variety of topics, and we wanted to create a vehicle to share them. So twice a month, watch your email, our Facebook, Twitter feeds for what's coming next. If you have questions for our guests, as I just mentioned, please type them in the chat. We will be extending the webinar if necessary to accommodate questions. So if you want to stay on with us after the 30 minutes, please feel free to do so, but this will be recorded so that you can always watch at a later date. We will make sure that everyone's muted, and you do not need to share your video if you prefer. Shelly, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Gabby, and welcome everybody. We start out tonight actually on a bit of a sad note, honoring one of the great champions for faith community inclusion, Ed Frim. Ed died last week on April 29th, and he has always, I think his whole life, been involved in Jewish communities, and especially passionate about including people with disabilities in Jewish life, in faith community life. And as such, a lot of us knew Ed during his days when he was the inclusion action community leader for the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. He did an amazing, amazing job. But even before that, when he was in Pittsburgh, he was the executive director of the Jewish educational agency there, and instrumental in bringing inclusion to that community as well as other places that he lived. His most recent position, which he just started last summer, was a head of school at the Metro West Jewish Day School in Framingham, Massachusetts. It's a great loss to Ed's family, of course, and his school community and the community in general. And we honor him by dedicating our webinar tonight in his memory.
Thank you, Shelly. So Shelly and I know many of you, but we don't each know all of you. So I want to just briefly introduce myself. My name is Gabrielle Kaplan-Mayer, and at Jewish Learning Venture, I am the Chief Program Officer, and I have directed our whole community inclusion initiative for 7 years, focusing on the inclusion of kids and teens and adults as well with disabilities in our Jewish community across the greater Philadelphia area. I'm a writer as well, and I am the mom of 2 amazing kids, including a 17-year-old son with multiple disabilities, including nonverbal autism. So this topic is very personal and very exciting for me tonight. Shelly?
Hi, thanks, Gabby. I live in Minneapolis, and in a prior iteration, I directed the Jewish Community Inclusion Program for people with disabilities. And that's where it became my laboratory, so to speak, to do the work that I do in inclusion. I started my own company 10 years ago called Inclusion Innovations. And I work primarily with faith communities as a consultant. I do a lot of speaking and a lot of just help communities think differently about inclusion. And I've had the absolute joy of working across denominations with so many amazing people I think I'm also a writer, an author, and I think the thing that makes me really so proud to be called to this work are the stories and the people I get to meet and hearing how changes are really happening even now during the time of COVID-19. So much positive, wonderful things. So many are happening. So I keep moving this ahead. I wonder what that means. I'm gonna introduce our speaker tonight. I'm so excited. Karenne Hills, Dr. Karenne Hills joins us from Brisbane, Australia, where it is just barely past the dawn. Karenne maintains a portfolio lifestyle with a number of professional interests in the field of disability, tertiary education, counseling, and nursing. Along with her teaching responsibilities at Christian Heritage College in Brisbane, Karenne operates a private counseling, health, and disability services practice. She provides professional development workshops and consults to local disability organizations. And Karenne is currently working on an innovative program designed to support students with specialized learning abilities to achieve success in post-school educational and employment opportunities. Karenne recently completed her Ph.D. studying the spirituality of people with nonverbal autism. She regularly speaks at local, national, and international conferences on various topics pertaining to people with disabilities, spirituality, and autism. Karenne holds a special interest in the theological and spiritual considerations for people living with disability, an interest born largely out of her personal journey with her two sons. Her children are her inspirations and have taught her much about life and how God meets people with a different life context. Karenne has published in several academic journals and books. Karenne, welcome. It's
Thank you.
a delight to have you. So we have a few questions that are important for people to know about you and your work. And the first question is, can you describe your research for us?
Yeah, I can. It's been a long time doing it. So I wanted to look at how people who may not have the same opportunities to hear for religious participation and religious information and learning would conceptualize God, or did they develop a spirituality separate from being taught about God, and how did God meet people with a different life context? So it's a long story, personal story, as to how I got to that point of wanting to find out that. And then I became very interested in people with autism, but particularly people who were placed at the severe end of the autism spectrum and who had significant communication issues with that diagnosis. So I became very interested in their worldview and their journey, and so that's why I chose that group to work with and look at their spiritual, how they developed a spirituality. Did they develop a spirituality? Did they have any concepts of spirituality if they had not been taught that? So that's what I set out. And I set out to find out, really, in a nutshell, the question was, I came to a point where I thought that through my own journey, that all people are created in the image of God no matter what. And so there are no mistakes. And so if God does create somebody with a life context that might prevent them from meeting God in the usual way and having a faith that was the usual journey, then to be considered a loving God, he must meet them somehow, was what I thought. And so if so, how did he meet them? How did people meet with God differently, and what did that look like? And so that was what I set out to find out.
Karenne, I'd actually like you to share a bit about, because it's incredible and fascinating, what did lead you to this particular research area?
So what led me there was my own journey in a way. So I have two sons now. They are now aged 31 and 25. Both have significant disabilities, and the youngest one is autistic. But when I was pregnant with my first son, just a routine scan when I was 25 weeks pregnant. Oh, hello, everybody. A routine scan uncovered that there was a condition, that the baby had a condition called fetal ascites, which is very rare and considered incompatible with life outside the womb. And all advice was to terminate the pregnancy, which kind of went against my beliefs and what I wanted to do. So I went for a second opinion to an expert radiographer who did an amniocentesis that day, and the baby was stabbed with the aspirate needle, and I went into prem labour. So there I was, not really knowing what to do, but I decided to do whatever I could to preserve the pregnancy and leave the outcome to God. And so I went to bed for a very long time. For about 3 months of the pregnancy, I just tried to preserve the pregnancy. But during that time, I experienced what I consider a type of epiphany. I spent a lot of time in prayer, as you do in a life crisis anyway, but I spent a lot of time in prayer, and I felt by the end of the time, by the time Sam was born, that that God had told me 3 things, and those 3 things were that he would live, that I was having a boy, that he would live, and that I was to name him Samuel, because Samuel means, in the Old Testament, Samuel, God heard my prayer. And the only way I can describe that experience, it wasn't like a burning bush in my bedroom or a voice out of heaven or anything like that. I just describe it as a greater awareness. And so I kind of knew what the doctors were saying and what the outcomes were from a human level, but I knew, in bold italics is the way I explain it, that there would be a different outcome. And there was. He's now 31. So there was a different outcome. But as we journeyed through life with him, it became very clear that he had some kind of disability, and took me a while to reconcile all that. But when I did, I realised that he was known and named when he was still in my womb. And so God knew him, and there could be no way that his life journey wasn't how it was supposed to be. And that's what transformed my beliefs about people with disabilities and their spiritual journeys. Then as the boys grew, they started telling me these remarkable little stories that were a little bit outside my concepts and teaching and what I had experienced. They told me some amazing stories about things that had happened to them. And Sam had an experience with an angel that told him things about his life, and my other son had different experiences, and they were bigger than me, these experiences. And so I had to open my worldview and consider different ways that God might meet with different people. And then I wanted to find out more about that. And that's where it started. And then I wanted to find out more about that, and that turned into a research study.
Thank you, Karenne.
That's sometimes our children lead us rather than us leading them. Our best teachers. So tell us a little bit, who did you interview, without getting specific, and what were some of the surprising things that you learned while you were doing this research?
Okay, so I chose, as I mentioned earlier, to do the research through people who are on the autism spectrum who are non-speaking. And believe it or not, in Brisbane, so I'm in Brisbane, Australia, hence my background. I tried to make it Queenslandish. But there's a group of people in Brisbane that meet together. They're called the Brotherhood of the Wordless, and it's a group of non-verbal autistic poets, and they write beautiful poetry and perform their poetry at many celebrations around Queensland, Australia really. But so I connected with that group and went along and asked people. That's where I recruited most of my participants from, was people that were within that group. And then I had one international person also who had a different, was different outside the group as well. So that's where my participants came from.
Karenne, what were some of the surprises?
Oh, that's right, sorry.
That's okay. We're just curious to know what surprised you in your findings, or just as you were going through this research.
Yeah, well, so many things surprised me, many things. I think one of the most confronting things to learn was that we assume as a society very much that no language equates to no intelligence. And these people were incredibly articulate and intelligent. There was the same variation of intelligence amongst these people, amongst my participants, as within the normal society. So the first big thing was that there was no intellectual impairment. It was not an intellectual thing, and that was one of the big things that I really wanted to bring out in my research. The other thing was, and there were many, but another thing was that I had only 2 of my participants had any formal religious background, and some of them had been raised by government institutions, so had not had any even world exposure to the world, but they all, every single one of them, described deep spiritual experiences and spoke with rich metaphors. And it was the rich metaphors of their language that was really beautiful, but also the spiritual experiences. So more than half of my participants had had an experience with an angel, more than one experience with angels, and whether or not one of them didn't even have the word, had not been exposed to the word for angel. So he called this being that rescued him one night when he was lost a shining white winged being, was what he called it. And that's how he described it. And the interesting thing about that story was he had run away from an abusive home and got lost, a government home, and he got lost in a storm and was hiding out in a drain. And he called it the shining white winged being, just sat with him all night. And he said it didn't speak, but it communicated with me. And the thing that blew me away was if a human had have come and found this person, there could have been no communication. You know, no one would know how to communicate. There was no sign language, nothing. It just would not, you wouldn't know what to do other than call the police, really. But send somebody that can communicate telepathically with somebody who's lost, and there's a rescuer. And it was a profound experience for him, and also for me to learn that how he was met specifically to his need. And many of the other stories, another female participant had been in an institution and was left in a shower and really badly burned in the shower. And she had an experience with God, and she called it God. And she said to me, through her communication device, she said, "You and others have experiences with God, you just don't know it," was what she said. And so God encouraged her through her journey in the hospital, because she was in such a bad place after the burns. and couldn't communicate with anybody. Nurses and people, she couldn't communicate with them. So the other thing that was really something that I really want to advocate for, it wasn't really surprising, but it was something to really note, was all of the participants had been adults when they received a method of communication. So they had all gone through their schooling with no methods of communication, and they'd all received that as they got old. Oh, one of them received it as a child, Lucy Blackman, and you may have read some of her books. She has published quite a few books on her journey as with non-verbal autism, but they all described when they received a method of communication and were able to get their thoughts out of their head, and through that their mental health became much better, and they had a lot more clarity, and it improved their lives significantly to be able to get the thoughts out of their head. One participant described his head like a big ball of wool that was all tangled up, and the communication helped him unravel the thoughts and be able to think more clearly and not have so much anxiety. So that was a really practical finding from the research.
Karenne, I'm sure for many of us who are listening to you, it's, you know, such new information that many of us wouldn't know or perhaps haven't thought about or considered. And I'm wondering, as you're sharing your research, now that you've written and this is out there in the world, what impact do you hope that it will have?
Look, first and foremost, I really hope that a platform becomes available for people with non-verbal autism to share their stories. They have valuable insights and quite amazing experiences, and I would love to see that expanded. One of the things I observed in the research also was that many of my participants had had a lot of hardship in their life, a lot of abuse. Just imagine going through life being intelligent and being considered unintelligent, and no one can communicate with you, and they've had very, very difficult life circumstances, but not one of them expressed any bitterness or any anger about that. And I asked, in the second round of interviews, I asked them about that, and they all, without exception, they all said, we have time to think. We spend a lot of time thinking, and we have time to think and choose who we want to be. And we choose to be gentle. Yeah, it was really the beautiful, beautiful people. And they certainly have a message. And the other thing that came through loud and clear from my participants, but also one of the things I confronted when I started this research, that there was absolutely zero literature, none. There was no academic literature at all. So what I did find was some grey literature, which were books that had been written or authored or co-authored by people who were non-speaking autistic people. And what I found largely in those books, there was about 20 at the time where I started, there's more now, but what I found by that was really validated by my participants' stories. I've lost my train of thought now, was that they all knew or all believed that they had autism for a reason, and it was for them to contribute to the society, and they all felt that they had a message and that they wanted to contribute to society and bring their message. And their message is a message of love, a profound message of love. And so they had, through extraordinary circumstances, found love with themselves and with the divine. It was really beautiful.
Karen, Shelly, I'm just going to pause before our last question, because Karen, I know people, as they're taking in and processing what you're sharing, may have comments or questions. So Shelly's going to ask one more question that we had. We're just about at 8:30. It's sort of amazing on our first time that we sort of were able to get it just about right. If you have a comment or question, Karen is generously going to stay on for a bit. Please put it in the chat box now. Shelly?
Karen, I've read your dissertation, and it's extremely readable, and I know that you've had some of it published. And if there's a way that people want to learn more from your writing, they just need to be in touch with Gabby and myself, and we can expedite that. I want to ask you a question now. The global reach of what you've done, of this research, what advice do you have for faith communities to find new ways of seeing people and hearing people differently, and accepting such powerful and diverse ways of exploring the divine in their lives?
Yes. I encourage faith communities to embrace new ways of hearing and new ways of seeing people, and to provide opportunities for people with different life circumstances from the norm to participate and to have their message shared. And I think the first thing is to open your eyes to difference. And there would be things that my boys told me when they were little that was out of my realm of experience or belief or knowledge that was possible these days. And I came to the conclusion, one of the conclusions of my thesis was that I think most people in society, we gather a lot of feedback, and a lot of our worldview is shaped from our conversations, just by, even if someone's not talking, their facial expressions and their, you're nodding of your head, or, we get a lot of feedback when we communicate. But people with autism that don't speak, don't have that feedback. They don't give it, and they interpret it differently. But they don't give the same sort of feedback when you're conversing with them. And so I believe that those people, or people with disabilities in general, receive an extra measure of grace, and an extra measure of the ability to commune with the divine in whatever way they need to experience that. And if we can be open to different ways than what might our traditions in our faith communities allow, if we can be open to different things, we will learn new things about God, and which is what we're there for in a lot of ways. So that's what I would encourage. Encourage your congregation to be open to difference, and then allow people to have that expression.
Oh, Karen, thank you.
Shelly, we have 2 questions.
At least. We are busy.
Yeah.
If you need to drop off.
Oops, you just muted, Shelly.
I know why I did that. I'm just going to put up really quickly our contact information, so that if you need to reach us, if you want to reach us, we just lost that. Here we are. You can reach Gabby at Whole Community Inclusion, or you can reach me at Inclusion Innovations, and we're both ridiculously easy to find. So let's get back to Karen and questions. For those of you who have to leave, thank you so much for being here. We have some guests lined up for the next couple of webinars. We're excited to present them, so stay tuned for that. Gabby?
Yeah, we have two questions and comments, Karen, so I'm going to give you one at a time. The first is from Ann Masters, who says she has lots of questions, but two in particular. Do you think the fact that most of the individuals you interviewed were poets impacted their similar perspectives? Building on that, how did they express their poetry? Though they didn't use words, it sounds like they definitely have language. Any comments? Oh, this is interesting about the suspicions about facilitated communication. And I think, Karen, that for those who might not know, that all of the people you interviewed used a form of communication called facilitated communication, right?
That's correct. So I'll answer that one first, and then go back to the other ones. So yes, I did confront that in my journey through my thesis, and it was a big surprise. So there is a lot of negativity towards facilitated communication based on very few stories where people have been exploited by their facilitator. So facilitated communication means that somebody, because of the dexterity issues that people with autism tend to have, they need somebody to support them when they both emotionally and physically support them while they type on a letterboard or an electronic device. And there has been some criticism about that process, that it's actually the facilitator doing the talking and that the person themselves has no ability to have that kind of cognition. My research, I had 7 participants, and the reason why I had so few participants was finding people that to be part of the study was very difficult, but the interviews was very time consuming for a little bit of data, so that was all I could manage. But I had 7 participants with 6 different facilitators, and they all told the same stories. So one participant didn't know any of the others, had never met, that was the international one, and the others were all in various stages of how long they had been using facilitated communication, and who worked with them and who were their facilitators and how well they knew them. So the outcome, that all those same stories of people that weren't in the same room for the interviews and all those sort of things was quite encouraging, and hopefully will make a contribution towards validating facilitated communication. And the thing with facilitated communication, it is a stepping stone, and so the goal is for people who need to use it to be able to type independently, and some of my participants were doing that. One of my participants would type with his right hand that his mother facilitated, so she offered the facilitating, and then when he made a mistake, before anyone knew that he'd made a mistake, he would use his left hand to backspace. And so he was completely in control of what he was doing. So that's my answer to that. That's the short answer. The fact that they were all poets, I think they use a lot of metaphor in, that's what I noticed. But even from the other participant that wasn't part of the poetry group, that participant used rich symbolic metaphor as well. And so I wonder if that's just part of how their brains conceptualize things is through metaphor. The metaphor was really rich through every story. And so I ran, I used a software package to analyze the data, and that's what the software noticed, all the metaphor as well. So perhaps they were a little bit more articulate because of their practice at poetry, maybe. I don't know, but certainly the poetry, because it wasn't in no way religiously constructed, the poetry group, so it certainly wouldn't have led them in the journey of what I was asking them, you know.
Thank you, Karen. And then from another Karen who writes that I'm the parent of a 22-year-old daughter with nonverbal autism. She does not have a way to communicate her thoughts, however, above simple wants or needs. And Karen, that's similar to where my son is functioning with language. Did you interview any caregivers of people with autism that do not communicate through, in other words, through facilitated communication? If so, what did you find?
No, I didn't interview any parents because that wasn't the nature of my research, and you have to be really narrow in. So I didn't interview any parents. I would love to do more research and do more writing and do more exploring on this topic, and that would be something that I would really, really like. So no is the answer. I think my encouragement would be to just be aware that there is a spiritual connection in whatever way your son or daughter can experience that, and to believe that they're having a journey, a divine inspired journey, and we may not know it as we receive messages through words, but I think you'll be able to see it and experience with your child with your own way of communicating with your child.
Really, thank you so much. As Shelly said earlier, if you want to stay connected and follow where Karen's research is going, we will definitely continue to follow and to share her platforms.
She'll be hopefully in the States next May.
Let's hope so.
We are hoping so. I'm just so incredibly moved, Karen, by the work that you've done in really seeking to understand, giving people the opportunity to express their spiritual experiences. You know, and I think it goes beyond, so much beyond the theological aspects of religion, and takes us into that marvelous, wonderful world of spiritual connections. I think also it's I think your research gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you.
And
it certainly gave me a lot of hope too, actually. Yeah. It was actually such a privilege to do that research.
It is a privilege to have had you wake up your day. It's not that early there, but to wake up your day to spend with us and share your research. It just honored. Gabby and I were just so excited when you accepted our invitation to be our very first guest.
Thank you. I was so honored to be asked. Thank you.
You are welcome. I want to thank everyone for joining us on our very, very first episode of Everyone's Welcome, a fresh conversation about disability. If you'd like to be notified of upcoming guests and programs, just contact Gabby and I. Again, Gabby is at Whole Community Learning, and I'm at Inclusion Innovations. We'll notify people who registered for the webinar when the recording is available on YouTube, and we'll also post it in social media so that you're aware of that. And again, just reach out to us if you'd like a recording. We want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day, your evening, to be here and to share with us such important understandings and new understandings of ways that people who often aren't regarded as having something really significant to contribute to this world are so much more than what we see. And I think that that's something all of us can be advocates in our own faith communities to make sure that we understand and we share how important it is to listen, to really listen, and to see and to seek new ways of communicating and drawing people out and sitting and being present with them. So thank you all so much. And we will see you next time.
The conversation to be continued. Thank you, Karenne.
Do you want to unmute? Do you want to unmute everyone, Gabby, so we can just have a say hey?
Yes, I will actually hit the stop recording before we do that, though.
Okay.
So give me a second to do that.